Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today on the topic of security game changer, breaking down the barriers to moving sensitive workloads to the cloud, sponsored by SUSE and Google Cloud in partnership with S2W Media. My name is Brad Howarth. I'll be your MC for today's discussion. It's been a great pleasure to have been a journalist reporting on the technology industry here in Australia over the course of the past 25 years. And the one thing that I'll say, which has always been true, is there's always something new and exciting to write about. We're very much looking forward, therefore, to sharing some of the new insights that we're uncovering when it comes to the world of cloud security with you all today. You're going to be hearing from our speakers momentarily who'll be sharing some of those insights, as well as a little bit of a look into the business and technology roadmap from both SUSE and from Google. Before we do any of that, though, a couple of points of housekeeping for you. Firstly, questions are encouraged. We know you're out there. We know you've got questions, otherwise you wouldn't have tuned in today. So please do share them with us. We've done our best to anticipate what you might be interested in, but there's always something we've missed. So please, at any stage today, feel free to input your questions using the questions tab. Cast your eye down to the bottom of your browser window. You will see a little tab there for questions. That's the place to place them. We'll be doing our best to move through those questions in the second part of today's presentation. I should also let you know that we have 2 downloadable assets for you, which you are welcome to grab from us at any stage. Simply look for the handout button also at the bottom of your browser window. Those 2 documents, a buyer's guide to enterprise Kubernetes management platforms and the ultimate guide to Kubernetes security. So please feel free to avail yourself of those at any time. I should finally also let you know that we are recording today's session, and we will be making the link to that recording available to you not too long after today's session is wrapped up. So in case you want to relive any of the highlights or share it with a colleague, we'd very much encourage you to do so as well. Now, our format today will see us starting with a fireside chat with the gentleman that you can see on screen right now. He is industry commentator and veteran technologist, John Taylor, working currently as the Group CIO for MedHealth Group, but having also been a former CISO and CTO at AGL. He will be discussing why the approach of confidential computing represents a security game changer, as well as talking about the business value that it can deliver. We'll have 2 other speakers who will be joining us shortly. They're not on screen now, but they will be in just a moment. Also, we have Manish Patil, who is the Global Technology Alliances Head for SUSE, another seasoned technology executive and transformational leader, as well as Mark Johnson, Head of Security for Google Cloud APAC at Google, a security expert of over 20 years, despite his youthful appearance, as you'll see shortly. Now, let me firstly set the scene for today's discussion and briefly touch a little bit on the market landscape that we see out there. Of course, it's no secret that securing mission-critical sensitive workloads in the cloud has at times been seen as a little bit risky, especially for critical infrastructure sectors such as government, healthcare, and financial services. In fact, we know that IT decision makers of these highly regulated industries have often shied away from going to the cloud amidst fears regarding technologies and topics such as encryption, data confidentiality, privacy, country restrictions, and data sovereignty. But the story has dramatically changed of late, thanks in part to the advent of what we now call confidential computing, a concept whereby data is encrypted in memory to limit access and to ensure data in use is protected. So my 3 guests today will be touching on this and diving a little bit deeper into some of the related topics. So without further ado then, let's get into discussion. Now, John, you've been waiting very patiently for me to get through my preamble, so I think it's probably a good time to bring you into this discussion. As an experienced global IT executive working across different verticals and regions, what does the term confidential computing mean to you?
Well, for me, it's probably been the missing link in what we've been trying to do over the last few years. I think it is actually trying to cover off some of the gaps or perceived gaps, shall we say, within a cloud environment, particularly with around public cloud environments where there's still probably a bit of reticence for shifting within corporates and within businesses themselves, probably exec teams as well as security professionals, IT professionals.
Got it. So when we look at the technology landscape, we see change on a constant basis. But when you think about this concept of confidential computing, is this something you'd actually call a game changer? And hopefully you will do, because otherwise my next question is a bit meaningless. But if you do see it as a game changer, then why would that be the case?
Yeah, I think it's probably like you were talking about Mark, and he's been around a bit. He probably looks a bit younger than me. And there's been a lot of game changers over my career. I'm not so sure this is the game changer, but it does build on a lot of things, and brings together a lot of things which has been missing. So hopefully, it then, if it gets a wide set of adoption as a standard, and then it becomes like encryption cards used to be in servers back in the day when you used to have a data center sitting somewhere in the corner of a business. It actually takes organizations to the next stage of confidentiality of customer data, their levels of security capability has gone up with just simple techniques, which is part of the plumbing of the cloud environment, as opposed to being well, how do we put in particular controls, which might be costly, or just accept risks that we probably shouldn't be accepting. So I think whilst it's I'm not touting it as the game changer, but I'm not saying it's not adding a lot of value.
Good. We'll call it a game changer then, rather than the game changer. Cover our bases a little bit. When you think about the pain points and the challenges that are faced by C-suite executives, though, including people like yourself, then, why do you think this is a particularly important concept that they should be embracing today?
So I think, so when I look at it, any IT environment, and security is part of that, and it's no different. I think the key areas that you sort of worry about is cost, complexity, and delivery. So if you talk about what we're doing at the with encryption of the workloads and confidential computing, is you're actually making that environment simpler. So you're taking away some complexity. Hopefully, you're taking away some cost. So hopefully, what it's doing is actually helping organisations shift forward and get away from those areas, and actually focusing on making sure that delivery is paramount, and then your projects and your capabilities are getting moved forward.
Got it. So if we look then at this amidst the various major security shifts you've seen, where does this fit into the overall trends and the changes in the landscape that you're witnessing now?
I think it comes back to complexity. I think one of the things around a concern what's in the C-suite is around the security area is security in itself is seen as a bottomless pit. Still, by a lot of organisations, it's seen as an expensive problem, and so anything that can actually help reduce that cost and also reduce your risk is actually going to have double the benefit. And there's a lot of push from over my career, and it'll go on for a long time, is around how you do security in an organisation, and it's all about how you reduce risk. You never have the conversation it's actually going to reduce your cost, unless you've already got some problems. So I think getting that risk-based discussion more centralised around reducing cost as well is pretty much a fundamental shift that we have to make as practitioners.
I mean, it's one of the fundamental truths of security. It's not likely to be something we're ever going to solve. And I know when I talk to a lot of professionals, it's always that question of, well, how much should we be spending? How much money do we put into this problem in order to give ourselves the confidence that we've done what we need to do to be able to get there? Now, you yourself have delivered a number of successful technology programs. You've led business units. You've probably got some thoughts and techniques you might use to help solve those questions for yourself. But what advice can you offer to others out there that are listening in today, working at the coalface of IT security, in order to enhance and maybe streamline their own activities?
I think the number one part is simplify the message, and I think over the years, as I've got a lot of mistake collateral that I've built up over the years, where I've made I've had good wins and I've had mistakes, right? And you learn from those, and as you walk through your career, as long as you build on those and narrow down those opportunities for making those mistakes, you're going to be on a winner. So the biggest thing that I see where younger people coming through, or lower people in their careers, They come through more of a technical discussion, and whilst there's a lot of good technical people around or technical understanding, more so at the C-suite level, what happens is they lose the audience. So simplifying that message, and then so when you're focusing on a program, the key things that you really want to focus on is, so I'll sit in there and I'll talk about a program, and I'll go, right, well, we want to be the world class in 3 areas. So that's governance, that's security awareness, and incident response. So if you get, that's what we want to be the best in. Because when you start talking about tools and you start talking about we want to implement this, all again that people see who are signing the checks, the CFO will see is cost. So if you talk about strengthening governance, then everyone, you're actually doing or bringing the business along for the journey, and the business is getting you to implement what they want. If you've got security awareness, it's a low-cost marketing campaign that you can use for security, and and you always get people that will do the wrong thing, so you're hopeful to reduce those mistakes. And in incident response, it's not it's not if it's going to happen these days, it's when it's going to happen. So you've got to be able to have the muscle memory in your organisation to respond really effectively. But what you're creating in there is a feedback loop. So if you have an incident or practice your incident, you've got learnings that to go back into your governance process. The governance process then says what changes we've got to do. Your awareness then goes out and says part of that awareness campaign is what we did, what we didn't do, what we did well, and educate your users. And in going through that cycle, what you'll end up doing is maturing your security capability with a very, very simple message that I've used in boards, a number of different company boards and a number of different executive teams over the years, that people just get. So, and they go, oh, okay, no worries. And then you can have the risk-based discussions in your governance process. You can have, you can talk about technology to solve problems, but in your governance process. So there's all these, that simplification of message really does help get it really pointy in what you have to deliver.
Now, apologies, sorry.
Go.
Right. So I was just saying in my opening that we do see that certain sectors such as healthcare and government have tended to shy away from the cloud in the past. Do you think that stance still needs to be maintained, or is there any particular reason why they should still be doing that, or can we move on from that older thinking now?
Very much so. I'll put my hand up when cloud first came out back in like 2000 and something, 2008, 2007, something like that. As I'm very much a cloud skeptic and those sort of things. And over my career, as things have changed and improved, I've really now becoming more of a bigot towards shifting to cloud. So AGL, for example, I drove the shift to close down the DCs and move all the applications. And we had close to 400 applications over to the cloud, and nothing was on-prem. Doing the same with current MedHealth business is actually shifting everything over to the cloud. So if you focus in on then again simplifying the message, you're focusing on the 3 requirements of what you need is you automate the stack. So you've got automation that improves your time to market. Cost, so you're reducing your cost, and the got from that the CFO doesn't like really is that you're changing from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, but it still should be a benefit there, often cost neutral. And the third one is security. So if you bake in your security controls within your automation capability, you're hitting whatever compliance requirement you need, whatever audit requirement you need. You've all got that together, and through lifecycle management, it keeps current, and you're actually then again lifting your security maturity to where you want to be.
Got it. So I'm going to put one more question to you, and then I'm going to get Manish and Mark to put their cameras back on again. But before we do that, just one last question for you at this stage, John. How does this SUSE and Google matchup then change the IT security landscape?
Good question. I've not been a heavy user of like a Google or whatever, but had pockets. And I see Google as a very much and Mark can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure he will. That it's great for driving my data landscape and those analytics pieces, and it's a real strength in there. So I think one of the things that I've been talking about and driving some of my peers over the decades nuts in is how do we become a data-centric, security model-driven, platform or organisation or industry, and I think if we can get these sort of things right, then what happens is you actually then starting to really drill into the painful parts of data management, which is how do you put the rights on the records, and how do you put it onto the fields, because okay, well, I don't have to try and secure the blob of data. You can secure the components of the data that you need to secure. So I think that's where it's quite an interesting concept, and I think that's where it's going to set that foundation that we need to do. And I think that's a good positive for the industry and the sectors.
Got it. So at this point now, I might ask Manish and Mark to pop their cameras back on and jump into the conversation. John, really do appreciate your insights though, and I'll encourage you to chime in throughout the remainder of the discussion, because I'm sure you've got plenty more to say. But the one thing that really resonates for me is that comment you made at the beginning about hopefully reducing complexity. And something I've observed over 25 years is that every time we bring something new in, regardless of the promises made, it seems to make life more complex. So if there's potentially an opportunity to reverse that and to make life a little bit simpler for IT professionals, I think that's an incredibly good message to have out there. But Manish, Mark, thank you, welcome. Thanks for joining us into the conversation right now. Maybe I might just get you to tell us a little bit about each of your roles. So Manish, can you tell us a little bit about what you normally get up to, and maybe one or two things we wouldn't otherwise know about you?
Thanks, Brad, and thanks for the team here to talk about this important topic. So Manish Patel, I'm with SUSE, and I'm responsible for the technical alliances for our cloud hyperscaler business. My focus is predominantly on the cloud business and how we grow solutions and offerings and solve customer problems as they're looking at hybrid IT, moving their world from a traditional on-prem kind of environment and bursting it, as well as migrating into the cloud. So just a quick background on me. And a fun fact about me that a lot of people don't know is that I like to race motorcycles. So not a lot of people know that, and probably wouldn't think about me that way, but that's a little fun fact for everyone.
Got it. I see you in a whole different light now. Mark, how about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your role and maybe something we wouldn't otherwise know about you.
Yeah, cheers, Brad. So I've been leading the security customer engineering function in Asia Pacific for the last 5 years at Google Cloud. It's been a massive evolution over that 5 years. Prior to that, almost a decade in IBM. My dad's a 20-plus-year IBMer. I'm a family of geeks. My youthful looks but long experience comes from taking over my high school's IT systems when I was still there, and them offering me a job when I finished high school to actually run the computer networks at the school. So it's been a long time, and seen the evolution from being a consumer of that right through to running it for large corporate enterprises and big companies, and now a really what has become very large and complicated cloud platform for my customers to learn how to securely adopt and understand what's changed, which is exciting discussion today.
Brilliant. All right, we're looking forward to digging into some of that experience then. But Manish, I'll start by putting a question to you. How important, in your opinion, is this concept of confidential computing, and how far is it going to change some of the factors in the IT security landscape?
I think John commented earlier on, some of the evolution and how we've come to this stage. And it's a very interesting time as we talk about this topic. As 2022. Just kind of at the tail end of the pandemic, as we get out of some very, dramatic life-changing events happening around the planet, it's forced a lot of companies and, to rethink what they want to do about diversified workforce, companies that are pushing, the envelope in terms of figuring out how to support their employees working from home or remote locations. That has brought a very different dynamic in terms of the security domain and the concept of being able to, just protect the data and the assets and the IP within organizations as it traverses different parts of the internet in different organizations as they come together, they research, they collaborate. So I think it's a very paramount time, very interesting area in terms of how this technology is going to be a disruptor in terms of achieving those goals for companies. We're very happy to be here to talk about how we've been able to enable that and really start helping customers on their journey.
Now, Mark, at the beginning, and including the question I put to John, was around the idea that a lot of these critical infrastructure organisations in government, in healthcare, etc., have in the past tended to shy away from the cloud. We are seeing a reversal in that. The attitudes do seem to be changing. I'm going to assume that you wouldn't think there was any reason why they shouldn't be in the cloud today, but in terms of the incentive then, what are some of the benefits that you're seeing these organisations who traditionally been a little bit reticent to go to the cloud getting from making that leap?
It's multifaceted in the opportunity that they have using the cloud, but some of the key areas is actually taking away some of the burden of operating their IT infrastructure and using the cloud service provider to operate that for them. And that democratizes some of the effort, both technology and also operational expertise needed to support an underlying infrastructure that didn't necessarily add a lot of value to their business, but did potentially add some risk. And so it allows the organizations to focus on some of the earlier aspects that John mentioned around that governance, security awareness, and incident response, while creating a governance function that says the cloud service provider will take control of this for me. So an unprecedented level of technology, things that they may not have been able to achieve themselves, like encryption at rest, in motion, and now in use, we'll be talking about more. But these type of things were hard to achieve, hard to govern, hard to implement. It's literally built into our platform by default. All data encrypted, all data in motion and at rest, full stop. And that's a huge technology achievement, which sounds simple, but actually is fully now democratized by just using the service without a massive capital investment in that space. So increasing the overall base hygiene, I think, is probably the biggest advantage that the cloud service provider brings, decreasing operational overhead for the customer in this space and allowing them to focus on what's more important for their business and protecting their operations.
Great. So to everyone out there, I definitely encourage you, to get your questions in. So please use the question tab, but you want to jump in? Go ahead, please.
I can comment on both those because they're really good points. I think from what Manesh was saying before around the pandemic changing the way businesses operate, and I think that's spot on. Never a truer word has been spoken. But I think from a security capability, I think where the sector or the security professionals need to enable the business is that you should be looking at everything that you manage, run, operate, whatever you want to call it, is assumed connected directly to the internet, and the security model fits that. Then it doesn't matter where people work, doesn't matter where people are coming from. And in my time at AGL, we redesigned the security model for the organisation, and we did a stress test before pandemic to make sure that we could have the whole business run off out of the office, and we never came back nothing skipped a beat because we've designed it and done the work to get there. And I think that's where that hard shell days and all that sort of stuff are gone, well and truly gone, probably 10 years ago. So externalization of your applications in your suite is a must. And then talking about with Mark's point is, again, another very, very good point. And I think one of the things that organisations do miss, though, is they outsource then their accountability and also lose sight of making sure they have key skill sets internally to support what needs to be done. Because I'm sure Mark and Manesh have probably had these discussions with people on the other side where the techie guys are doing the right thing, but there's a lack of understanding on the client side. So there's a hell of a lot of frustration on both sides in the relationship. As they start, like any good marriage, hearts and diamonds ends in clubs and spades, and it just goes from good to worse. So, and I think that's where organisations miss the point.
But I think you made a very good point yourself earlier when you talked about the importance of being able to communicate, and particularly be able to communicate in a language that the people you're speaking to will actually understand.
Yeah.
Got it. So I was just saying, for everyone out there, please, if you've got a question in mind, do get that into the question tab as soon as you can. We don't have a lot of time left here, and I want to make sure that if there is anything on your mind that we haven't covered off, that you are putting those questions to us and giving us the opportunity to answer what you might be thinking about before we wrap up today. But Manish, I'll come back to you for a moment. This particular wrap up then between yourselves and Google, why do you see this as being important? What is it that their audience needs to know in terms of the benefits that this wrap up delivers?
Yeah, that's a really critical differentiator, and I think we're proud about that from what some of the solutions we've built together. One of the fundamental things we feel is that there's too many proprietary solutions in the security space, and there's too many proprietary clouds that kind of want to do things in a very proprietary manner. So the big thing that the partnership between Google and SUSE brings to the table is a very fresh breath of openness, and it's really the openness in terms of security, the openness in terms of not having vendor lock-in. Philosophically, SUSE and Google have been one of the largest open source contributors on the planet. We've been in business for 29 years. Google's been one of the largest open source contributors. And I think those philosophies have come together in terms of an open source approach on top of a really open, secure cloud that Google and the platform's running. So I think, that's really the big feature, that you can run all these things extremely securely, at the same time go back to sleep and not worry about being locked into a certain vendor.
Got it. Thanks for that. Now, Mark, you're a bit of a security guru, and certainly I think LinkedIn seems to believe so based on the size of the followership that you've got there. This concept of confidential computing, where does this sit for you in terms of the pantheon of security innovation and game changers? And are there others out there at the moment, other security initiatives that you think our viewers today should be checking in on?
Yeah, look, it is up there. I think we've all wanted homomorphic encryption to come real, but Google's a leader in this, and we still haven't made it work perfectly well yet. It doesn't scale. I think quantum computing is another potential, and quantum encryption, but this is a long way off, and we're just understanding what that's going to be for our industry. But something that is real and here today, confidential computing, without having to change your code base. That's something that I'm very excited about, because it creates an accessibility, a democratization, where you can pick up a virtual machine running on a great SUSE Linux platform and just transport it over to a supported open platform that allows you to actually not change the application code, but then just be able to use this in-memory encryption function. And on Google Cloud, John said it really well, simplicity is what you need in everything. It's literally the tick of a box. So when you boot that VM and you create it, you tick the box and say, be a confidential compute VM on an AMD underlying infrastructure. We're using AMD processors to make this successful, bringing that available in the region across Asia Pacific. They're in Sydney, they're in Hong Kong, they're in Singapore, they're all across India and Japan as well. So making security is not great in its box by itself. It needs to be accessible, democratized. And for me, that game changer is making it easy and making it usable. So organizations can get into the confidential computing world, know with comfort that their information at rest, in motion, and in use is encrypted, and they've got attestation around that. That's huge. That's a confidence level that, beyond the IRAPs and the FedRAMP compliance that we've got on our platform for our organizations, that they can actually go, oh, there's a technology control on top of this. It gives me a confidence above and beyond just the contractual or operational governance controls.
And look, I think that's a good point, that we're covering all the bases now, really, aren't we? So in a way that wasn't quite so easy to do beforehand. I do like the way, though, that there's a lot of synergy coming up in the comments here around openness, around the desire to move away from lock-in, around the notion of moving towards simplicity, which I hope is going to be music to the ears of anyone who's tuning in today, because I know that certainly a lot of the IT and security professionals I speak to are constantly striving for that. Manish, I'll come back to you for a moment, though. If you look out into the world today, what do you see as being the most, I guess, popular or viable options when it comes to organizations wanting to host secure and mission-critical workloads out there?
Yeah, so our solutions that we built around security and including the confidential compute portfolio really starts from customers being able to run some of this stuff wherever their workloads may be. Some of them might be running some of their stuff on-prem in their own data centers. They might be in some colo facilities. They may be on multiple clouds. So the options kind of started expanding from being able to do what they're doing currently, not necessarily just go to the cloud first. Obviously, the cloud is a big paradigm in terms of where the innovation and some of the economies of scale and all the other factors come in. But really, those solutions can be deployed from anywhere they're currently running any kind of workloads. And like Mark alluded to earlier, in terms of game changer, or we look at some of the disruptive nature of this, it really is a phenomenal technology enabler from being able to take anybody's existing application without having to refactor it, without having to even take a penalty in terms of running that workload in an encrypted manner, and being able to just get that security aspect and the control parameters kind of done. So this really extends, from on-prem to the cloud as the customers are looking at the hybrid journey on their way to being more secure.
Got it. So Mark, what is it that Google's going to be doing then to expand this confidential computing ecosystem?
So there's a few areas in it. We've pushed it into the container world beyond just virtual machines, so you can run confidential containers on our platform. Again, another form of openness. Obviously, we're founders of Kubernetes for that. We're big contributors and consumers of Linux as an open platform that we're very proud to be a part of and leverage for our business successfully in a highly secure way. But we're also premier members of the Confidential Computing Consortium, which is trying to create a portability and openness around trusted execution environments, which is how this magic works. The magic is all around that AMD processor, what they call SEV, or the secure encryption. And that enclave, that capability, is something that we want others to be able to use. We want them to be confident they can take that without having to be locked in, run it wherever they want, and use a platform that's right for them, meets their compliance, their data sovereignty needs. So bringing it closer to our customers, having it available in more regions, like I mentioned earlier. But then also, there's got to be some value in it as well. And working with the really great third generation AMD processors, we see customers with HPC workloads getting 70% more memory bandwidth out of that trusted environment. So getting security and performance and cost savings upwards of like 13% on general against the configurated machine. So this is that democratization, the increase in security and the increase in performance. It's the triple deal in this space, which is very rare. And again, simplicity as well, click by a box. And people don't believe me when I say it. I say, challenge us cloud service providers. We want to bring something to you, make us show you, make us deliver on this, because that's our job as hyperscalers. We have to do something totally different, totally challenging to make sure you're confident in the way this runs. And that's the value I think businesses should be driving to asking the service providers to bring the story to them in the partnership with open ecosystem.
Got it, thank you. So Manish, I'm going to put one more question to you, and then I'm going to start grabbing some of the other questions that have been coming in from outside. Manish, is there anything else to add then when it comes to best practices that can be used to expand data protection and compliance, especially for the regulated industries we've been describing?
Yeah, that's a great segue into where we need to be looking at. There is just a lot of sensitive amount of data kind of moving, like Mark said, between different ecosystems, and the remote nature of the work that we talked about earlier is even accelerating some of that. Some of the regulated industries, when you look at financial SOX audits, you're looking at GDPR in Europe, you're looking at FedRAMP for federal workloads. All of that kind of boils down into having some really secure kind of structures and constructs being put in place. But then there's also a lot of things in terms of best practices from making sure that the employees and the organizations are well educated and trained on some of these things in terms of identifying what the issues could be. It also boils down into having really cool and good policies and procedures that can be established and followed. And I think John hit on this earlier, but it all boils down to also a lot of automation and tracking and compliance auditing capabilities that have to be built in. So I think a combination of all of that, and I think when you go back to a partner like Google that we've been working with, there's very few cloud providers that'll actually come back and say, yeah, we'll give you some security control audit parameters of what you can actually come and ask us for in terms of running your workloads in a much more secure environment. So I think those are all the best practices you want to look at. In addition to the technology, there's a policy element, there's an auditing, automation, compliance element. But it's a bigger picture across all of these different paradigms when you look at it.
John, anything you'd like to add in there when it comes to best practices that our audience should be thinking about?
I think a lot of organisations are talking about or making the mistake where they do a lift and shift of their capability or applications into the cloud. You're missing at least 2/3 the benefit of what cloud brings you if you're doing it that way. So, I think closing down to DC, moving your application on cloud is pretty cool, but doing it with end-to-end automation. So, and I think that's where whether you're going to refactor your applications or you have to do a lift and shift because you've got no option. If you're not automating and leveraging the capabilities which is in a particular platform like a Google and the others, then you're sort of wasting your time because you're not really realizing the benefits. And I bet you and your money you will have to redo the hard slog that you've just done again, and you'll have a mess of environment. So you're just adding complexity as opposed to reducing that complexity.
Got it. Thank you for that. Now, I've had a question come in here, which is a little bit technical in nature. So, Mark, I'm going to nominate you as being the respondent for this one. Can you explain to us, please, how data can be encrypted while it is being analysed in computer memory?
Okay. And that's the magic. So it's really up to the CPU that actually does this because it addresses the memory from the CPU itself. And so the workloads or the processes as they come in need to be addressed by the CPU. And that memory in general is unencrypted because there's an overhead associated with that. And we all want the fastest memory in the world to do our analytical workloads. So what AMD does is creates a short-lived or ephemeral key that's in a secure component of the processor that is dynamically generated, right? It's not put in, it's not extractable, it's not created by AMD, it's not created by Google, it's generated within that processor and non-extractable. It then writes to the area of memory for that virtual machine or that application with an encrypted key function and addresses it. It's why it's extremely fast because it's happening right between the CPU and the memory bus. And actually, apart from attesting that it's been turned on, you really don't have a lot of control over it because you want as little entry points into managing this to a degree because that creates potential surface area for attack. So this SEV, secure encrypted virtualization capability in AMD is what I'm talking about. There are plenty of documents to share with you and be happy to share more. The Linux kernel and the development with the Linux kernel is what makes this invisible, right? And that's where SUSE and Google have made a lot of efforts to make this invisible to the customer. So you're running a Linux application, pick it, lift it, shift it, run it on an enabled Linux kernel version, it's going to rock. And you're going to see extremely small overhead on the workload. We see sometimes 3 to 5%, depending on the particular level of transaction and memory speed of that. So please look into it. There's plenty of detailed technical documentation around the way that the key is created, the life cycle, the non-extractability that I've spoken about without me getting extremely deeply technical into these functions.
And we're not going to ask you to do that because we've only got about 5 minutes left anyway. So what we're really hearing, though, is it's all the protection with none of the penalty. Manish, is this something that people easily understand when you're out talking about this particular capability?
Yes, I think this is at a point in inflection where I think customers are really looking to do this across any workload, and not just the regulated and the federal and the government workloads we talk about. I think we have customers that are running SAP that are looking into it because SAP data is the lifeline of their ecosystem and their ERP, supply chain, whatever they're running. So it's really any data has to be secured at the end of the day. Doesn't matter what data it is because it is important. And so that conversation quickly leads into, hey, what's the best way to do this? And like we talked about with the advantages of some of the enablement that's happened. We make it very seamless to be able to do this, whether it's on-prem or going into the cloud.
John, if anybody out there in the audience wants to take this idea back to their peers in management with their organizations, for those CIOs and CISOs out there, any advice you'd give them on how they might go about building buy-in for a concept like this?
One, don't oversell it. Don't oversell anything.
Not that we've ever been guilty of that before, but yeah.
I know we've all done it. I tell you. I think again it comes back to that simple message, and I think where my head goes with this already, you're talking about how do I manage my privacy at a low cost, my privacy exposure at a low cost. And when you talk about that, that's a direct impact to each director that's sitting on a board, right? Because privacy does have a fair bit of visibility across boards, but it's also, again, costly because all this stuff's a tax on business. So if you can say, well, okay, I'm encrypting, I'm reducing, I'm doing it on the fly, and I'm doing it cheaply and more robustly, then you're sort of like taking out, you don't have to go down the technicals, but what you're doing is you're talking about how I'm going to reduce the risk posture and the exposure. You still got the end user, you still got the person at the other end that can do the leakage and cause you problems, right? But at least you're taking a part of the puzzle or the challenge out of the equation. And I think because I wouldn't go near, I wouldn't go near an executive to try and explain this stuff, except for at the sound bites, right? I just wouldn't. No, and there's a lot of CIOs out there that would probably not get most of it as well. So you just simplify your message, do your 10-second grab, and if you're focusing things like making low-cost privacy exposure and reducing your risk, I think people will get it. Doesn't necessarily mean you get the funding, but you think about the incremental. You're going to go cloud, and we'll do it this way. Probably a little bit of extra cost, so the unit cost is low. But if you're going to go out there and you're going to go encrypt everything, you're going to put encryption cards, you're going to, back in the old days, VPNs here and all that sort of stuff, and you're going to do all this work, the dollar signs dollars start racking up very quickly, and that's not an incremental benefit.
Got it. We've only got a minute or two left, so I'll put a couple of very quick questions in before wrapping up. Mark, you talked us through a little bit of the technical wizardry that's come into play in order to make this a reality. Is there anything else coming down the pipeline with regard to confidential computing that we could look forward to in future days that you can share with us now?
Look, right now, confidential computing is very locked to the individual machine, and you can't get that attestation or create your own key to inject in and create portability for resiliency amongst that. There's technology which is coming out of AMD in the next generation. It's going to allow us to create more high availability and replication of this with confidence. So that's an area which is going to improve the resiliency of a confidential computing service. You're going to see confidential computing work more around APIs and serverless in the future. Look to that. I've got partners, Manish mentioned GDPR and a customer. We have someone who works for a provider to telecommunications in Europe. They actually changed their platform to use confidential computing without changing a line of code. It's matrixxx.com if you want to know more. And they've been able to offer a service that, beyond just the privacy and the contract and the GDPR compliance, gives that technical assurance to the customer. So looking for that in the vendor suppliers of applications, SaaS service providers and vendors, I think that's an area which, looking for a confidential compute back-end processing offering, we're going to see more of that as a differentiation to provide those services to customers, back-ended by probably cloud service providers like us, helping those providers to make that real.
All right. Now, unfortunately, that does take us to time for today. Hopefully, though, it doesn't mean the end of the conversation. We're certainly going to be contacting you after today with a follow-up from this particular session and a link to the recording. We would encourage you to reconnect. If you've got further questions in mind, then please don't hesitate to bring them back to us. We would like to keep this conversation going. I don't think this topic is going to run out of steam anytime soon. If anything, I think it's only really just getting started. So we certainly look forward to discussing this with you in more detail at future times. However, for the moment, we will wrap up for today. So I want to firstly start by saying thank you to my three guests, John Taylor, Manish Patel, and Mark Johnson. Greatly appreciate your expertise and interesting insights throughout. I want to thank everyone out there in the audience for joining us today. Certainly go out and spread the word. This is an exciting new opportunity to bring greater certainty and assurance to the workloads that we're operating. And we certainly do hope to see many of you taking advantage of the capabilities that we've been describing for today. However, for the moment, I will bid you adieu, wish you a fantastic remainder of the day and the remainder of the week. And I'd also like to say that while we can never stop spending on security, we can increasingly increase the level of assurance that we have that we're spending in the right way. So for the moment, once again, on behalf of SUSE and Google and S2W Media, I want to thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.